All right. Welcome to the Climbing Lifer podcast. This podcast is for people climbers who have gone 40 trips around the sun and want to do a lot more, and also want to have it be filled with rock climbing because that's what we love. I'm your host, Don McGrath, and I am just so super excited for this episode because I've written several books, and my guest today has written books and tons of articles about climbing, and we both share a lot of passion around that. So I just want to welcome Susan E.B. Schwartz to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today, Susan.
Well, first, Don, thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this.
Yeah, so Susan and I met many years ago, back in the early 90s when I first started climbing. And
was that the 1890s, you said?
That was the 1890s. Oh my goodness.
That's right.
Right? That was like a lifetime ago, right? And we stayed in touch for many years. And Susan and I had a chance to climb together back in the 90s. And then recently we reconnected at one of her book events. And so, Susan, why don't you share, you've always been an adventurer. And from what I saw in the bio you sent me, things I didn't even know about you were in your bio, being a dive master. And so you've always been an adventurer, but how did you come across climbing?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say I never thought of myself that way. You know, I lived in Manhattan. I had a corporate job. I was running marathons, but then I started, because I wanted to swim, I used to swim. I couldn't find a good pool to swim, so I took some scuba lessons, and then I became a scuba instructor. I sort of slid into it. Then I became a shipwreck dive master on this really dinky old boat out of Sheepshead Bay. There's actually a lot of shipwrecks outside the New York Harbor, fun fact. And I wanted to try something different. I tried some cave diving, and boy, is that one of the scariest things I've ever done. And then I decided, just on a lark, I wanted to try ice climbing. I had read an article. I didn't know anyone who ice climbed. It wasn't a brother, a husband, boyfriend. I didn't know anyone. I knew nothing about ice climbing. I couldn't even tell you what was the sharp end of the, from the not sharp end. But I made some calls, and I went up to North Conway, and I was just going to do it once to get it completely out of my system. And well, 6 weeks later, I'm back in North Conway, and that's what led me to try rock that spring. That would have been the spring of 1990. And as soon as I tried, I was just hooked. Again, it made no sense. I didn't know anyone who climbed. I had to take public transportation, but I wanted to do it.
So what had you try ice climbing?
Oh, well, I had read this article actually in an Outside magazine on, I think it was an article on Lou Reichardt, the mountaineer, which probably very few people will remember, but he was one of the great American mountaineers. And I was just fascinated by this community, what seemed to me this universe that I had no idea existed. And at least I wanted to experience it once. So I made some calls. I found my way to IME. I made calls and spoke to some people, and I was really lucky. I was able to be guided by Kitty Calhoun. Again, I don't know if you know that name.
What a great introduction to ice climbing.
Oh my gosh, we had so much fun. At least I did. She is amazing. And I went to her presentation that weekend at IME, and I was just smitten.
Wow, what an introduction. What an introduction.
Yeah, it was quite something.
And so then you got bit by the vertical world in the form of icicles hanging off the sides of cliffs. And then you decided that, you wanted to try what's underneath the ice, I guess.
That's right. So I was living in Manhattan, and like most Manhattanites, didn't have a car, and renting a car in Manhattan is a pain in the Batinsky. I mean, that's not wrong, but it's really a pain in the butt. So I, again, made some calls. I took public transportation. I got the bus to New Paltz, got off at the bus stop, and then I had to figure out, wait a second, I have to get from the bus stop to the cliffs. And I saw that there was this guy who had a backpack and a rope, and what I thought was climbing gear. I mean, I didn't really know. So I went up to him and I asked if I could get a ride to the cliff. And he said, sure. He had his friend picking him up. This is, we're getting off the public bus. And then I literally said to him, by the way, you're not a rapist, are you? And he said, no, I'm a climber. I said, okay, prove it. What routes did you do last week? And I had this guidebook out. I'm like, no, of
You're
course
fact checking, right?
I mean, without going in. Anyway, I got a lift to the, to the cliff.
So you said you don't think of yourself an adventurer. Hitchhiking a ride to a cliff with someone you don't know that's pretty adventurous.
But it was a climber.
It was a climber, right?
So either that or they went to a very elaborate.
So you'd already discovered that there was cohesion in that climbing community and that there was some spirit about it that, made you able to get into a car with somebody you didn't know. So
well, we were both climbing. This was 1990, and it's. I don't want to sound too much like, oh, it was the good old days, because I know the climbers who were climbing in the 70s would look at the cliffs in the 90s and say, oh my God, it was so crowded and fragmented. But there was a really wonderful sense of community, as you know yourself, and it was very easy to meet people and become embraced by that community. And there were a lot of us that it was just a great group of people, and not trying to make people who just started climbing recently feel bad, because I don't want to do that. Wonderful people who recently started climbing too.
Back in the good old days, I remember hanging out at the Uberfall, right? At the Uberfall, when there used to be a spring, you'd get water. Remember, you used to get water out of that rusty pipe.
And the bulletin board where people would hang out to try to find climbing partners. Yeah. And it's evolved.
What a great first mentor in Kitty Calhoun. And I'm sure you've had other mentors that taught you. We've all had mentors that have showed us, because not very many people just pick up a rope and go scale something that's so dangerous. So how about some of the mentors you've had over the years in climbing?
Well, and by the way, I wouldn't call Kitty was an inspiration, but a mentor to me, that means that there was some kind of real relationship. And so I wouldn't really I adored her. And I would imagine I still would too. But, she was guiding me for a weekend. So that's a different kind of relationship. There was a whole group of us. There was Guy Hawes, there was Patty, there was Rui Ferreira. Before that, there was George Mack. And, who I kind of fell into this climbing group, Ajax Green, great group of people. One of the luckiest things, though, I would say is I very quickly started writing about climbing, because I always wanted to write, and this is actually getting me to the mentor part. Always wanted to write, really didn't know what I wanted to write about. And very quickly, it was literally like 2 months after I started climbing, I had an idea for an article for Climbing Magazine. I wrote it up, I sent it in, and it was accepted. And the magazine called me back and said, can you, we really like this, and can you keep writing for us? And it was like, wow, okay. Wow. And what my specialty was really writing about people. And I think it was a real advantage that I happened to be spectacularly untalented as a climber, and I really am. At my best, I was a positively, I like to think very safe, mediocre, ho-hum, weekend recreational climber. I was really never anything better than that. But I think it also gave me perspective when I came to writing, because I had no interest writing about tough climbs, because after a while, they all sound the same. You go up, you go down. They didn't go up, they didn't come down. They fell 3 times. Someone died, someone didn't die. There were injuries. I mean, it kind of, where the story is going. But the people who climb fascinated me. And one of the really great privileges I had of writing about climbers was that I often got to climb with them. So I climbed with, all sorts of these incredible pioneers and famous people. And one of my favorites was Steve Wunsch, who I can't say I had the pleasure of writing his obituary recently, because that's kind of but what I meant is I really wanted to celebrate his life. He was a wonderful person and an amazing climbing partner. And I learned so much from him. I also learned a lot about how climbing is important, but it's also really important to have perspective on your ego and just have fun. Just enjoy it. And for people, if anyone, by the way, I was at the climbing gym this morning, and Steve Wunsch's name came up because someone said, "Oh, what was your last article that you wrote?" And this was like last month. And they said, "Who? Steve who?" So Steve had put up what was considered the hardest climb in the world back in the late 70s, I believe it was, and what many people thought was the first 513 in the gunks. And he did it on site. He did it placing his own pro. And it was an amazing achievement.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I do have a very funny Steve Wunsch story if you want to hear it.
Yeah,
sometime.
I was just going to say, can you give us a sense for what Steve was like having you spent time with him?
The thing is, I hasten to add this. When Steve and I actually became pretty regular climbing partners in the mid 90s, and I think it was really because, his best climbing days were far over. He had a very demanding Wall Street job. He had, dare I say it, and I loved him. He had a bit of a pop. I mean, he hiked a lot, but he wasn't in peak climbing shape. So to climb with someone who was a safe and enthusiastic second was, I think, it was a lot of fun for him. But the first time we climbed together, he hadn't climbed in I think 15 years, 20 years maybe. I'd written an article on him, and he was like, "Oh, let's try climbing together once. Yeah, fun. Let's see what it's like." And so we're on a very moderate climb in the gunks called Disneyland. It's a 5-6. And he's going up and down the first pitch. He's trying to figure out the pro. And there are these two guys who come up to him, and they say, "Dude, you can do it. We know, we've been watching you, and you gotta just believe in yourself and believe in your feet. It's all in the footwork." And this is the best footwork in the world, You just, "Dude, you can do it." And they're urging him on, and he was so polite. He smiled. He said, "Thank you." They went away. Okay, so he figures out, we get to the top of the climb. And he says this very matter-of-factly, not showing off at all. I can't say it. I'm going to kind of jump to the punchline, as it were. It turned out the reason why he was having but why he was sort of having to work out the pro on the bottom, is because he'd climbed Disneyland a lot with John Bragg and John Stanner, two other pioneers of the gunks. But they used it as a descent route, unroped. So he had never seen it from the bottom to the top. He'd only seen it from the top to the bottom without any pro.
Right. So he had no experience with the gear, even though he probably down climbed the thing dozens of times.
Dozens of times. It was their descent route.
Wow. That's wonderful. Yeah. I'm going to make a quick shout out to our sponsors. One of our sponsors, Sharp End Publishing, is a publishing company by climbers for climbers. They have a broad array of guidebooks as well as other instructional books dealing mostly with climbing and adventure. And Fred and Heidi Knapp are wonderful people, and they put their heart and soul into that business. So if you're planning a trip, go to sharpendbooks.com and see if they have a guidebook. I guarantee the quality is fantastic. And if you don't have a trip planned, go to sharpendbooks.com and see if one of the guidebooks inspires you, because that's half the reason we climb, is so that we can take trips. And they actually helped Jeff Ellison and I publish Vertical Mind, which is about psychological approaches for optimal rock climbing. If you find that mental aspects in climbing might be holding you back, we've heard a lot of great things about Vertical Mind. And so go pick up a copy. You can go to sharpendbooks.com or you can go to amazon.com. All right, back to you, Susan. Just needed to give a shout out to the people that make this podcast possible. So you had some great mentors, and what was that was kind of a phase one for you, right? That was we joked a little bit when we were scheduling this podcast about you being a climbing re-lifer, because you had a 12-year hiatus. So that was kind of phase one for you. So what precipitated the break from climbing?
I'm going to kind of gloss over, but let's just say life, which included elder care for a while, and then being a single mom for over a decade, and going back to a corporate job. life.
Life happens.
Life happens. And actually, now I have my daughters in college. My son is a high school senior, and who's going to be graduating, hopefully, from high school. And last April, I decided that I was going to do something for myself. And I hadn't taken a vacation. I couldn't even remember the last time. And I decided I was going to try to surf. And so I took lots of paperback books because I had no idea if I would ever be able to get up on the surfboard, let alone stand on it. And to my surprise and delight, I actually found the first day I was up on the board. Now, these were baby waves and a baby board. But I was still pretty pleased. And I started to think about, wait a second, all those years, it always seemed that getting back into these things was so far away, but it really wasn't. And then I think it's a great story. Out of the blue, last Christmas, I was talking to my daughter who's in college, engineering major, like so many climbers. And she said, Mom, I decided what I want for the holidays. And I said, oh, honey, that's great. What do you want? She said, oh, a climbing harness. I said, huh? What? Because I hadn't talked about climbing. I have photos from some climbing shoots that I did with Jeff Ackey. They weren't around. They were in the garage. It just wasn't my life, my kids were competitive swimmers, and before that, it was just, my life is very contraburbia. And she found her way without me to climbing, and she's fallen in love with trad climbing in particular, and that's what she wants to do. She wants to move out west after graduation and climb. And so I started to think about it, and one of the things, by the way, I will say, I know a lot of these, we were supposed to be like upbeat all the time and positive. Well, I actually went to tried climbing in the Gunks twice this summer, and it was both discouraging and depressing both times. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get back to it in a way that would be fun for me, because it was just, I couldn't even, I was just, it was, following routes that I used to lead, and it was hard and painful and very undignified. One of the routes was Disneyland, and I don't know how many times I'd led that route, and the only way I got up the crux was I finally had to twerk, if you know what I mean. It's a weird mantle.
A special climbing move you invented.
It was very luckily I was like at the end, so my daughter was tied into the middle, so no one saw. And it still took me like 2 hours. It was like something absurd. So hopefully. But what was interesting is this was a very, outside of the obituary of Steve, this, I don't know if you can see this, I thought this would be fun. Can you see this? This is the last article I wrote for the climbing magazine.
Pull it up a little bit. Yeah, yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's the 2008 Confessions of a Climbing Mom. And it's interesting for me. I went back and I reread it because basically the conclusions I had, I actually, this often doesn't happen in life with me, where like you go back and you think, I do exactly the same thing. I really feel exactly the same way. Sometimes it happens. But I looked at these conclusions and they pretty much are how I feel now. And it includes the fact that I kind of would hope that my kids wouldn't become climbers, because I really do believe climbing is dangerous. I think we can minimize dangers, but I really didn't want them to climb, but I also want them to find happiness and fulfillment. And if that's really what my daughter wants to do, then I support her in it.
Yeah, the title of that article has a couple of different meanings, right? A climbing mom is a mom that climbs, which was kind of your life a while ago, right? But it also has the meaning of someone who's the mother of a climber.
Well, at the time, My daughter was,
It could be
I
that
think,
way, right?
8 or 9. So that was not intended. But it was interesting. I actually, you can tell this is climbing lifer. You need the reading glasses.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I actually also concluded. So I fall back on this. Childhood is short. The time to nurture and imprint is fleeting, but the rock will always be there. I'll just keep doing my pull-ups, so I'm ready when it comes time to return.
There you
And
go.
that
was
12
prophetic.
years ago.
Right? That
That was
prophetic.
12 years ago. I still got to get that pull-up, but so it was really interesting to go back and and see that. There were other things I did. I skateboarded, snowboarded. I'm not sure about going back to skateboarding, honestly, but
Talk about dangerous. I mean, that ground is really hard. I used to skate when I was young. And,
yeah.
The ground is totally unforgiving and you fall a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
So,
but
yeah. So I think it's really curious that you were kind of at some level thinking about it, that would someday be in your future, right? Getting back to climbing, and it's kind of surprisingly came back to you in an unexpected way. And you said it was difficult, but I still know you're in the gym. You just said you were working out and trying to get there. So it must not have been that.
I'm trying to.
It must not have been.
I mean, I did. Oh, I mean, I worked out over the years, not specifically for climbing, and then it was just for life. And I wasn't sure if I would get back into climbing, and I have to say, I mean, my goals are now very modest. And I'm hoping, I'm hoping to be able to get back to like leading 5.3 at the gunks and maybe second 5.6 without it being miserable, because, we're at an age where if it's not fun and if it doesn't bring you mental, kind of namaste, then why do it? There's lots of other things in life to do. So I'm hoping, but if it's not going to be fun, and I know this is climbing lifer, but I don't know if I'll be able to go back to climbing. And then it also, I was kind of thinking about this. If you're not actively climbing, are you a climber? And I don't really know. I mean, I don't know if I saw myself as a climber for all those years. I mean, I was first and foremost, I was a country Burbian mom who made lots and lots of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches while trying not to be late to work.
Right.
So it's a very different mindset.
But it is, you have a passion for it, clearly. And just when I hear you say about hopefully you'll be able to do that, well, when we were younger, we liked type 1 fun, we liked type 2 fun, and we sometimes even like type 3 fun. And type 2 fun is like where there's misery involved, and type 3 is where there's lots of misery involved. But it's, when I was young, I used to love type 2 and 3 fun. As I get older, I mean, I like a lot more type 1 fun, things that are just by their nature.
Exactly. Fun. Like you look back at some of the things we used to do and you think, I don't know if I really want to, do those things. And then there is actually, I think this is kind of interesting. When that article came out, Confessions of a Climbing Mom, I think it was Matt Samet was my editor. And he told me it generated, a huge amount of emails and letters. I think people were still writing letters at that time to magazines and media. And he shared some of them with me. And what was really interesting is it was particularly young women who kind of at least for what I intended, misunderstood the article. And there were a couple of almost angry and very dismissive emails from women who, because I mentioned in the article that actually I believe it's harder for a mom to climb than for a dad. And what tended to happen, hopefully it's different now, but what tended to happen is that more of the housework and childcare and the teachers' conferences tended to fall onto the side of the mom. And there were these women who wrote back who said, Susan Schwartz just, is she saying that women shouldn't work? And, and it was like, no, actually I used to work in biotech venture capital. I'm not saying women shouldn't work. I'm saying it's a personal decision. And, when our oldest was really young, we really tried. We had babysitters at the gunks that we found through the college. And then also what happened, and again, this maybe would be, if you get a climber who's a better climber than I am, this might not have been an issue, but I remember the last time I had climbed with my then husband, we were in New Hampshire on some, I don't remember, I think some classics and on Cathedral Ledge. And the top part is this schmutzy stuff. I think the guidebook said something like, then scramble to the top. Well, I am crappy on schmutz. Like, I am such a klutz. So I can trip over schmutz on level land, And we actually simul-climbed, and I remember thinking, oh my God, if I fall and pull my husband off and we both die, I will be kicking myself in whatever place I go to afterwards, because now we left a 2-year-old without her parents because her mom, was klutzy on the scramble to the top portion. So that was the last time we climbed together.
Wow. I could see how that would be a very scary and life-changing incident. I want to give another shout out to one of our sponsors, and this time it's me. This is my show.
Absolutely.
And I am one of the sponsors. So, I think you can appreciate this, Susan, and others too. The first book I ever wrote was 50 Athletes Over 50. I interviewed 50 athletes over the age of 50, trying to understand. I wrote it when I was in my 40s, trying to understand how do I remain active and be one of those athletes over 50 and hopefully even beyond that. And got some great stories from athletes from all over the country, even around the world, on their perspectives on how they stayed at it and the lessons. I've actually taken the lessons from this and have incorporated those things. So if you're looking to be an athlete over 50, or if you know someone who is an athlete over 50, I actually find that this makes a wonderful gift. People sometimes give this book. I would say about half the people who buy this book from me that I get to meet, they give it as a gift to somebody that they know. So you can find this on Amazon.com, 50 Athletes Over 50. So Susan, I kind of feel like having you on this podcast, I kind of get a twofer. So you're a climbing lifer, relifer, you're kind of working your way back, finding out what that takes, but you spent a lot of time with Hans Kraus. And Hans Kraus was definitely a climbing lifer. So, I'd love you to share with us, tell us a little bit about your book. It's a fantastic book, and I want people who are listening to this have a chance to learn a little bit more about your book. But then I'd love you to share with us kind of your perspective on Hans as a climbing lifer.
Thank you. By the way, the book is called JFK's Secret Doctor, and I didn't pick the title. The book was originally self-published because Hans had called me when he was dying. I had written an article about him. And so we had to get started immediately. And so I just started the leap of faith. I self-published, sold several thousand copies, and then that's the point of this. Then I was able to get an agent and a publisher, and it's now distributed by Simon & Schuster. And I had no control over the title or the cover. But Hans we need more people in the world like Hans. He really tried to make a difference both in medicine and in climbing, and he did. And now I'm going, steer me a little bit more in terms of what are you looking for? Because I could I don't want to just go on.
How did Hans get started? I've heard you speak, so it was kind of, I think, a lot of that fascinating.
Well, Hans grew up in Europe, and he came here in 1939 because his family flunked, as he put it, the Hitler test. They were part Jewish. mountaineering in Europe was a very accepted, was a very accepted activity, much more advanced, if you were, than it was here in the States at that time. So Hans's father was a gentleman mountaineer. This is sort of I think it's kind of a fun fact. His father was very, very wealthy and very accomplished as a skier as well as a climber. But climbers were then, mountaineers, even if you were very accomplished, if you had money, you always hired a guide. It was a sign of a gentleman that you hired a guide. So when Hans came here and started climbing, his father actually, called the activity childish. And for one thing is, he didn't hire a guide. Of course, who is he going to hire? I mean, he was one of the best climbers in the country at that time, outside of Fritz Wiesner, who, Hans was very quick to add that Fritz was so much a better climber than he was. And Hans's climbing partners, he would say, in Europe, were much better climbers. I'm not sure if this is a little bit of an aside, but I actually was very, very touched by the very deep, lifelong friendship of Hans and Fritz Wiesner, the two pioneers, really the developers of the gunks. And I think there's an incredible story that really shows the kind of love the men had for each other. And I'd love to tell it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell us the story. I can't wait to hear the story.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is an uplifting story or not, but I think it also shows the character of both men. So, Fritz was living in Stowe, but he would visit the gunks, fairly regularly. And he would solo by moonlight at Skytop, his favorite climbs. And this was even into his late 70s, early 80s. And Hans had told me he actually believed that Fritz wouldn't have minded dying climbing. That's not the uplifting part of the story. When Fritz was about 88, and Fritz was about 10 years older than Hans, he had a stroke, and he called Hans and he mentioned it. And Hans said, "Oh, I'm going to come up immediately, to visit you in Vermont." And Hans had said, I got there and I realized his stroke was so much worse than I had realized. And Fritz died not too long afterwards. But Hans went back and revisited his old friend again. And this time he brought with him drugs. So that he told me that if Fritz had asked him to help him commit suicide, he would have done it. And this was when, you have to remember, this was, I believe, 1988. So there was, if Hans was found out, he would have been brought up on murder charges at least. But he didn't even mention that. He just simply said he never asked, so I didn't bring it up. But he had the drugs with him. Wow,
what a story! That just goes to show, like you said, the bond between those two. And when you climb a lot with someone, you do develop a pretty special bond.
Yeah.
Because it's life and death. There are life, and you have your life in another's hand.
On a much more positive note, a Terrier Story. I remember Hans saying, you have to remember that when we went to the gunks, nothing had been climbed. So they literally, the two of them would walk along the carriage road and they'd look up at the traps, let's say was the first place they went to. They looked up at the traps and one of them would say, there, that's where I want to be. And the other would say, go for it, in German, because they always spoke German when they were by themselves. And that's how they developed these climbs. And then they would often return the next week, and then the other one would make the second ascent. And all of their climbs were like that, except high exposure, where because Fritz was much better on cracks and technique, and that he wouldn't leave high exposure for at least a couple of years.
So did you ever have a chance to climb some of the climbs that Hans told you about, their first ascents on? Oh, well,
I did the moderate ones. And, they were later on, Hans made first ascents aided in the mid-late 1950s, and those are, you know, I think I got yanked up one or two of a couple of them, but those really are beyond my ability.
But like doing high exposure, I've done high exposure. And did you think of Hans as you were?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Hans's climbs, a lot of people don't think this way, but a climb has a personality to it. And the type of climb very much reflects the personality of the first ascensionist, of the person who went up there first. So, you know, Fritz's climbs are very technical. Hans's climbs are not technical. There's nothing subtle or elegant about any of Hans Krause's climbs. They're in your face. They're going to be exposed. You're going to need sheer physical strength because Hans was extraordinarily strong. He could do a one-arm pull-up when he was 60, and that was, you know, that was weird and unusual then. And they, you know, they require mental strength and physical strength. And when he was stubborn, so if he wanted to do something, he was going to do it. And so I remember he was telling me the story. Got to the, you know, the top lay on high exposure, and he had no idea what lay ahead because you could, you can't see it. And you know, he had like 3 pitons that each weighed like 20 pounds with him on him. You know, it wasn't the kind of gear that we have nowadays. And he knew he couldn't down climb. But I remember he looked at me and he said, "But I wanted to do it, so I did." And you know, he pulled the lip. And, you know, he's looking for a place to bang in a piton. He finally found one place. You have to remember, you know, it's slightly overhanging, so you have to hang on there. And he banged in the piton, and basically he knew it was crap. So then he looked for another spot, and the same thing happened. So he was able to bang in 2 pitons they knew were completely worthless. And about a third of the way, maybe halfway, he finally found a spot where he banged in the piton and he knew it was good. And so here's the thing, like he placed no pro at all on the bottom 2 pitches. And on the top pitch, essentially he placed 1 piton. That was the first ascent of high exposure.
Wow, what a story. What a story.
One piece. And he got to the top, and he, you know, Fritz came up after him. And he said they just sat there, you know, looking out over the beautiful countryside with this great sense of serenity.
Well, anyone who's never climbed high exposure and loves trad climbing, this is like a bucket list thing. You must go to the gunks and climb high exposure. And then you'll know what the story really means. Because when you're doing that last pitch of high exposure, you can't see. You got to come off this ledge around this blind spot and pull yourself on into the void, right? And it's like, 150, 200 feet straight to the ground. So I command you that a bucket list, if you're listening to this and you love trad climbing, a bucket list is to go do high exposure. So I want to make another sponsor break.
Absolutely.
This one again is me. Don McGrath, I learned a lot about leadership and about teamwork from climbing, overcoming obstacles, the mental toughness, training. And so the last book that I wrote is a leadership fable. And when I was an engineering manager, I used to love fables, and I would learn a lot from them, leadership fables. And so I decided to write one. And so this book, The Climb, it's a leadership fable about navigating challenging change. It's a corporate team and going through some real challenges, and through some climbing experiences, they get to learn how they're showing up on the team and at work, and they get to learn some valuable lessons. So if you like leadership, if you work with others, if you like climbing and you want to translate some lessons from climbing into a work environment, you can find The Climb on Amazon.com. So Susan, some lessons maybe that you've learned from your time climbing, and how have they translated in some of the other aspects of your life?
If I could I'm going to add, this is like a 30-second last comment on high exposure. Because, well, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't, when they think about the exposure in the gunks, is since the cliffs themselves are set on a hill, when you look down, you're actually looking down at much more than, 200 feet. You're looking down at another one, whatever it is.
Hundreds.
So yeah, it really adds to that sense of exposure. And Hans's last wish, because he was a very matter-of-fact person, no fuss. He didn't want a memorial service. He didn't want any kind of ceremony. He wanted simply to be cremated in the simplest, possible way. And a very old friend, one of his oldest friends from the gunks, and I'm not sure if this is illegal, so I'm not going to mention the name, but carried his ashes up high exposure and scattered them from the top. So the way you could say that Hans never left.
Right. Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
So
Like
incredible book, incredible stories in that book. The book goes into how he actually was a visionary in physical fitness and in the way that a lot of things that we know now and that people who do body work think and act now, Hans actually had discovered many years ago. So if that topic fascinates you, pick up Susan's book. It's absolutely fantastic. Where can they find the book, Susan?
The easiest way would be Amazon.
Amazon. All right.
If you go into Amazon. And
so life lessons that you've learned from climbing.
Well, in that case, actually, there's been a lot. And I think it enables me to look at risk reward in a completely different way. And I think a much more positive way, a way that's much more fulfilling. So it wasn't like I hadn't done, quote, risky things before. I mean, I didn't do a lot of cave diving, but I did a little bit. I got certified. Shipwreck diving is pretty spooky. But there was something about climbing where you really are constantly weighing the risk versus the reward. If I put this piece in, if I put my number 2 cam in here, I'll only have 14 other number 2 cams. You never saw the size of my gear rack. It was huge. For the rest of the climb, if you're constantly weighing and those choices, and then part of it too is also thinking, well, how badly do I really want this? What do I really want? What do I really need to do in order to be fulfilled? And sometimes it's worth it to go for the climb because you think the risk is really very little. And sometimes it's not. And you can have people around you saying, "Oh, you can do it. You can do it. This will be easy for you." And it just, having that the sense of where you are, what's right for you, what do you want, what's reasonable for you, and the answer for all of those are probably very different for almost everyone, and they can be very different from person to person, depending on the day or the year and where you are in your life.
And they kind of have to come from some sort of intuition, because climbing in itself, every climb you walk up to, I don't know, I was talking with Rich Goldstone about this, that I get butterflies as I approach every climb. It doesn't matter. I mean, because climbing is, like it says in all the books, climbing can be dangerous. And so there's a certain amount of butterflies that we all get. It's natural. And at some level, you just need to say, okay, I acknowledge it and I'm going to do this anyways. But sometimes you just make the other decision, right? And I can't tell you, personally, I can't tell you what makes me some days go, nope, not going to do that today.
There's an expression that both diving, like shipwreck diving and climbing share, and it's something along the lines of, experience works for you until suddenly it doesn't. So like, if you're used to running something out and it's like, oh, I've done this climb a gazillion times, I don't need to protect this particular move. Well, it's always been fine for me and you can work off of that until suddenly there's a luff and it's no longer working for you, or whatever is the reason. I actually had the American mountaineer Carlos Bueller and I actually talked about doing a book together, and it kind of never really went anywhere, but I did have some fascinating conversations with Carlos. And I remember, I don't know how this came up, but we were talking about risk and reward. And he had been one of the top extreme mountaineers in the world for many years. And doing the kind of mountaineering where basically you either retire from it or you die. Those are kind of the options. And he had turned to one of the Sherpas who had, I forget the name of this particular Sherpa, but one of the Sherpas who had summited Everest the most and really summited, really hard, the high mountains. And Carlos had asked him, what's the difference that you see in the climbers who summit and who don't, and the ones who summit and who die? And the Sherpa answered in one word: luck. So, I think there is that element. Like, of course you have to prepare and you have to research and get yourself in good shape mentally and physically, but there is that element in climbing, as there is in life, of luck.
Yeah, and it's just that, right?
Yeah.
Luck is luck. There's no sciencing it. There's no gaming it. And right now, I'm training to go back to Yosemite and do a climb with one of my old buddies that I originally did it with. We're going to do the rostrum, and right now we're training for that. When I was young, I wouldn't really train for it. I would just, hey, let's go do this, right? And you just throw yourself at it and come out May. And I don't know. I find now I'm a little more thoughtful. I'm going to go there prepared, or I'm not going to go at all. So I'd like to play a little game if you're up for it.
Sure.
I did this with Ajax Green, and it's called Get to Know Susan Fast. All right. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and just whatever comes to the top of your head. You ready?
Okay.
Favorite food?
Sushi.
Trad, sport, or bouldering?
Trad.
Favorite beverage?
Diet Coke.
Favorite book?
I've had so many over the years. It's
all right.
really
I'm pressuring you here. One.
I wouldn't say this is my all-time favorite book, but it's one I just recently finished and I love it. It's called Into the Planet by a cave diving explorer named Jill Heiners. And I had heard her at the Explorers Club, and her book is amazing.
Fantastic. How about favorite song or band?
Oh, the Beatles, Vivaldi, Ella Fitzgerald.
Okay, favorite piece of climbing gear. Favorite piece of
climbing gear. The Brow House at the end of the day.
House at the end of the day. Best answer ever. Best answer ever. And if you've never been to the Gunks and you go climb high exposure, there's no better way to finish the day than going to the Brow House.
They have these beers that you get with lemon. Oh, actually, can I tell a Brow House story?
Yeah.
If there's time.
Let me finish. Get to know Susan real fast. Okay. Gree or ATC?
Oh, definitely ATC.
Hotel or camping?
Depends.
Oh, come on, pick one.
No, it really depends.
Okay. Oh, what does it depend on?
I like both.
What does it depend on?
It depends on, let's see, if you ever stayed at Motel 87, which is now out of business, probably for good reason, in New Paltz, you would definitely choose Camp Swan.
Ah, gotcha. All right. Favorite car or vehicle?
Oh, trains.
Train?
Yeah, we said car or vehicle.
Yeah, yeah.
Long train rides. Love
All
them.
right, so that was an opportunity for people to get to know Susan fast, a fun little game that we play. So now I'd love to hear your story.
Okay, so this is one of the times I went up by myself, and I was climbing in the gunks. This is when Camp Slime was still around. It's been closed down. So I had different climbing partners on Saturday and Sunday, and I don't know where somehow I had my tent. Speaking of camping, I had my tent with me and sleeping bag. I set it up at Camp Slime, and but I didn't have a car with me, and I was my climbing partner left for Saturday, and I was meeting someone on Sunday. So I didn't really have a partner for going out to dinner. So I decided that I was going to walk down to Brow House from Camp Slime, which is near. It's not a very far walk. It's maybe half a mile. Not even that. It doesn't matter. Anyway, but it's the end of the day, and it's the summertime, and I am sweaty and muddy and greasy and grimy and just typical end of the day trad climbing, right? And I paused in front of the Brow House. It was the closest restaurant. And I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, I don't know, this probably isn't a good idea. And besides, they probably aren't going to want me in the restaurant anyway. And I walk in, I very hesitantly go up to, there used to be a gentleman who was like 90 years old, and he would greet you at the door. I don't know if you remember him. I forget his name. And I walked up to him very hesitantly, and I said, look, I completely understand if you don't want me to eat here, because I am pretty smelly and dirty after a day of climbing. Would it be okay? But again, if it's not, I get it. It's okay. Don't. And he reaches out with both hands, very European style, takes both my hands, and he said, we are honored to have climbers here. Please come in.
That's absolutely awesome. I can still, you telling that story, I can still feel what it's like sitting in the sun on the side, the outdoor patio they have, and sipping a half of ice after a long day of climbing, eating one of their huge, delicious pretzels, and just basking in the sun, after an incredible day of climbing. So again, bucket list item. If you haven't been to the gunks, go to the gunks, climb high exposure, just imagine what it was like for Hans up there on that face. Susan, it's been an absolute joy to reconnect with you. I really enjoyed going to your talk at Rock and Snow when we were back in the gunks, and just great to reconnect with you. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been helpful, and it's also been great reconnecting, and I look forward to next time.
All right. Take care, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you again. Bye.